Let's go to Hong Kong now. Our Kristie Stout standing by with the very latest. I mean, it was interesting, the US Secretary of State Mike Pompeo calling Beijing's plan a death knell for Hong Kong's freedoms, although without Donald Trump weighing in, and he hasn't, it probably doesn't mean much. Tell us about the international reaction and Beijing's response.
Yes, at the moment, we still have this war of words between the U.S. and China. But right now, during a pandemic, it's not about COVID. It's all about the fate and future of Hong Kong. And now we have China's ambassador to the United Nations taking direct aim at his U.S. counterparts, the U.S. ambassador to the UN, Kelly Craft, as well as the U.S. Secretary of State Mike Pompeo, who said that this legislation would be a death knell for Hong Kong's autonomy. We have this Twitter post that was just put up a few hours ago by China's mission to the UN, condemning those statements from the U.S. Let's bring it up for you. And it reads as follows, quote, "No country in the world would tolerate any activities that undermine its national security. Any legislation for Hong Kong SAR to safeguard national security is China's internal affairs. U.S. attempt in interfering in Hong Kong affairs is doomed to fail," unquote. Now, on Thursday, we know that China's parliament, they introduced that new national security legislation that would give China more control over Hong Kong. And right now, the National People's Congress is underway in Beijing, and they are expected to rubber stamp that legislation that would curb sedition, secession, and foreign interference here in Hong Kong. We've also learned that the legislation, if and when passed, would also mean that China's Ministry of State Security would be able to establish themselves inside the territory here in Hong Kong and enforce the law. As expected, there's been a lot of outrage here in Hong Kong, with one opposition lawmaker calling it the end of Hong Kong, the end of one country, two systems. Chief Executive Carrie Lam, the top leader of Hong Kong, issued a statement yesterday expressing full support for the legislation. But there is a lot of anger here in Hong Kong directed at Beijing, directed at the Hong Kong government, especially after the recent arrests of hundreds of people during the pandemic for taking part in these unauthorized flash mob protests, and that sweep of arrests in one day last month of 15 high-profile pro-democracy activists. Those arrests, plus this legislation that's going through the NPC, all adding to a sense of unease and growing tension here in Hong Kong. Michael.
And speak to the timing of this. Why is Beijing doing this, and why now?
You know, it's interesting. Beijing, by doing this, they are taking aim at something that happened last year, the 2019 Hong Kong protests. Beijing was very alarmed by the violence, the clashes that took place on the streets that tore apart the fabric of society, that also undermined tourism and hammered the economy. Beijing was also dismayed at the results of the local Democratic District Council elections last November, which showed a very poor showing for pro-Beijing candidates. But Beijing also feels that now is the time. There were some hints that this was going to happen. You know, just in the last month or so, we heard from China's top official here in Hong Kong, Luo Huining, saying it was time for new security legislation. When you look at how China is handling the pandemic, it's under control. The lockdown is over inside China. No new cases today. Factories are schools are back open. It feels that it's negotiating from a position of strength while the rest of the world is distracted. Perhaps that's the reason why. Michael.
Yeah, and that makes sense. Kristie Stout right there in Hong Kong for us. Appreciate it. Thanks.